This conference will now be recorded.
So we're delighted to welcome Elina Halonen, founder of Square Peg Insight and also an ICG member who'll be leading today's webinar. Elina is an experienced behavioural insight specialist with 10 years of experience of applying behavioural science in projects across the world. She was previously a co-founder of one of the first agencies to pioneer the use of behavioural science in the market research industry, and now works with both private and public sector clients as an independent consultant. She's also a certified member of the Global Association for Applied Behavioural Science for qualified individuals and organisations with an established track record and demonstrated commitment to behavioural science. This webinar came about through discussion on our members forum, and we thank Elina for volunteering to run it for us. This is yet another example of fantastic ICG collaboration at its best. Please note that there'll be a Q&A at the end, so please type your questions into the chat box as we go along, and we'll endeavour to get them all answered. We're really grateful to Perspective Research Services for sponsoring this webinar. Perspective Research Services provides help at every stage of the data journey as an end-to-end experience or simply to dip into when needed. They operate one of the largest independent call centres in the UK and state-of-the-art viewing facilities in the heart of London. They provide qualitative recruitment, face-to-face fieldwork, B2B mystery shopping and data processing services. So now over to Elina. I'll just hand over presentership rights to you, Elina.
Great, thank you. And do you know what, Lucy? I now forgot the amazing system that I had for the two screens, but I'm sure we'll make it work.
Okay, let's give it a go.
Yep. Okay. There we go. So I will do this and then I think it's, okay, this is what we can do. Yeah, it was that. So I choose that and there we go. You should have that. Is that showing all right, Lucy?
Yes, it is now. So if you want to put it on full screen.
Yep, is it on full screen?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thanks a lot for everything.
It's the proper full screen, right? Not the little one, the presenter view.
Yeah, it's
good.
perfect.
Okay. Yeah, slight trouble using two screens because I don't know how it looks like for you, but you know, there are no everyone's got their cameras turned off, so I can't see any faces anyway. So, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's a bit of an unexpected thing, how this whole thing happened. Someone asked on the ICG group or the email list about COM-B, and I replied, and then somehow I volunteered that I can answer people's questions, and then Lucy emailed and said, "Hi, would you like to do a webinar?" And I thought, well, that's probably more efficient. So here we are. I've been using COM-B for several years, and you know, I would not call myself any kind of like expert or anything like that, because I leave that to the people who actually wrote the book and so on. But I can certainly help to shed some light on it and how to use it and hopefully inspire people to look into it a bit more. So just some background on me. I've been working as an applied behavioral scientist and market researcher for, well, in applied behavioral science for 10 years now. And for those who might not know me from LinkedIn or somewhere, I was a co-founder of a company called Irrational Agency for many years. And then for the past couple of years, I've been working as a independent consultant, and I mainly work with other agencies as the behavioral science specialist. So I focus on this side now. And yeah, I've been using COM-B for 6-7 years, I think, well before it was, well before most people knew about it, and it seemed a bit crazy and academic back then, but now more and more people talk about it, which is absolutely wonderful. So hopefully I can help with more people learning about it and using it. So I'll get straight to the point. What is COM-B? The COM-B is actually a part of a bigger framework, known as the Behavior Change Wheel, and there's a book of the same name. And what makes COM-B and Behavior Change Wheel special is that it is a logic model, which means that it's not just it kind of gives you the logic to go through multiple stages. And it was developed out of 19 frameworks of behavior change, which makes it really, really robust and quite comprehensive. And that's really one of the things I like about it. And at its simplest, the COM-B, the inner wheel or the hub of the wheel, is quite broad and quite simple, and you can easily explain it to clients, to pretty much anyone. But then it also packs a punch under the surface, and kind of it can really help structure your thinking and so on, and work much more comprehensively and logically to design, analyze behavior and design interventions. So the purpose of COM-B is that at the core, you can identify the sources of behavior that you could target with different interventions. And they're known as the C, O, and M come from capability, opportunity, and motivation. And then around that core is a layer of intervention functions, which you can choose from based on the particular COM-B analysis that you've taken. I won't go into those today. You'll see a little glimpse of how they connect, but it's a whole other, we won't have enough time to go into all of that, and there's plenty of that, maybe another time. And then the outer layer is the 7 delivery categories which support the intervention functions. Now you can see from this is the actual wheel from the book. Yes,
Elina, sorry to interrupt. We can't. We've got a weird view of your slides. You need to go on presenter view. We've got both slides showing.
Oh, that's what I just. That's very strange. Hold on. Yeah, that's why I asked before. That one. No, I'll stop sharing because I have 2 screens, and I'll just do one.
Máskor meg ezen a FOSS platformon van még most.
Did that help? What do you see? What do you see now?
A couple of seconds.
What do you see now? 1 or 2 slides?
Nothing.
Nothing now.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I love all the different swapping between. Okay. Let's see. There you go. That should work. Does it?
That's better. Thank you.
Excellent. Now I can actually see your non-faces and the names and everything. There we go. We've got it right. I've got it right now. So and now I've got the presenter view. So that's brilliant. Okay. I'm getting some notifications that people have muted themselves. So what the COM-B is a method rather than a prescriptive theory. It doesn't give you a sort of a detailed blueprint of how to design or what to actually, what to do specifically. It's more of a systematic and theoretically guided sort of method to identify the types of interventions that would be effective given research and given the research that's based on, given the behavior, the context, and whoever whatever your target population is. And the process starts from behavioral analysis, so that you understand what the diagnose what the target behavior is and what you'd like it to be, and then moving on step by step to the intervention functions and behavior change techniques. Oh, what I was going to say before I moved on was that you can see from the model that it looks quite a little bit academic perhaps, and you can see that it was originally created for public policy and specifically public health, but which creates some challenges for applying it in commercial context, but that's okay. But so you don't have to necessarily stick to it very strictly because it was for a specific function and purpose, and it's not always applicable. So, and the key thing to remember is that it's not kind of a magic bullet or any kind of sort of algorithm that tells you exactly what to do and what will work in which context, but it is a method to find out what might work and what might work best, so you have a bit more confidence. What makes COM-B different is from things like Mindspace and East is that the last two, they are intended for intervention design, and they're sort of just a mixed bag of constructs, not a coherent model like the COM-B is and the behavior change wheel is. And in addition, the behavior change wheel is built off multiple validated behavior change frameworks, and it is continuously validated through research. There are websites like the Theory and Techniques tool and things like that, where you can always look up what research has been, like how the different techniques have been used, and look at the actual research that it's based on. That website at the bottom is where you can find out more about how these, in more detail, how Mindspace and East map onto COM-B. And so why I use COM-B and why I think it's very useful for everyone is that COM-B can really help to organize what you know about the behavior of a specific group of people. So it can be it customers, be it consumers or citizens, whatever it is, and help you review all the factors that might be relevant in a given situation. Quite often these days, we don't have a problem of not having data. We have too much of it. And when you start to go through tons and tons of data and try to group, try to make sense of it, you are inevitably kind of a prisoner to your own biases and your experience of, and it can make it difficult to have those conversations with different stakeholders. But the benefit of COM-B, or the real the real benefit of it is that you can use it to de-bias your own thinking, to make sure that you're not overlooking any factors or any aspects of a behavior or a situation. You can create hypotheses, so it doesn't constrict you or restrict anyone's creativity. Quite the opposite, it can support it and make those conversations with stakeholders easier. And quite importantly for market research, and one of the reasons I am keen for people to adopt this, is that there are more and more projects or clients who go between different agencies for behavior change projects or applied behavioral science, and it's sometimes difficult to kind of connect the dots between different projects because there's different models and it can get quite confusing. But at least with having this kind of sort of like a transcription encryption key can really help. And yeah, so it can structure your thinking, but it's important to remember that it's not a substitute of having a detailed understanding of the psychological principles. In case you're wondering, it does actually cover everything that you might see, you might think of being behavioral economics, and then it has more as well. This is not an official list from anywhere. I just once when I got this question, I thought about it for a little bit and started organizing, off the top of my head, various commonly known biases and heuristics under it. So that's really why I like it. What I like about COM-B is that it gives that structure and helps us organize a lot of things. So what you can do with the COM-B is works especially well with sort of complex situations. And the COM-B stands for those three things, that capability, motivation, and opportunity and motivation. The idea is that for any given behavior to happen, someone has to have the capability, opportunity, and motivation to do it. If you are missing one, it makes it less likely that they will do that behavior. The reason that motivation is in the middle in this diagram is that capability and opportunity both influence motivation. So I think it's just, it sounds better to be COM-B than CMO. But it's if you increase capability, like if you're better at playing the piano, you're probably more motivated to play the piano. Or if opportunity, physical opportunity, if you have a piano at home, you're more likely to play the piano because, I'm just using that as an example because it's very, very simple. But you can probably see how the dimensions are not separate. they interact, and that can be both helpful, but also you have to kind of think about it in a multi-dimensional way. I'll go through this very, very briefly because I've got some examples and everything, and there's so much detail that you can look into afterwards, but hopefully this helps. So capability in a nutshell is someone's physical and psychological abilities, so your inner capabilities that allow you to do something or facilitate it. Could be your physique, could be your knowledge or what you know about the world, including things like brand awareness would fall under knowledge, your intellectual capacity, skills, and things like that. In my experience, skills are rarely that relevant in physical capabilities rarely that relevant in market research projects. Sometimes it is. It's worth ticking it off and just, you considered it, but it's not that relevant. But how you solve these is by improving someone's understanding of why or how they should do whatever you want them to do. Add reminders, so helping boosting their memory. And then you can develop someone's physical, cognitive skills and so on. But usually it is to do with how to use in a commercial project. It would be awareness of a product or a service existing or how to use it, ability to use it and so on. And opportunity is the external world in the sense that it's not inside your head or someone's head. It's the environment that you live in, that you interact with, physical environment, but also social environment. So it'll be, even though you might, if you internalize social norms and so on, then they are kind of your values and attitudes and so on. That goes back that's in motivation. But if it's something to do with the social environment, other people's influence on you, for example, that would be an opportunity. And the reason it's opportunity and not environment is that it's the opportunity affords you, the environment affords you an opportunity to do something. It's not as easy to understand, or it's not as intuitive, but that's what it is. And you can address those by basically having enough financial and material resources. Sometimes that isn't something that a commercial client can do, but it's not a good reason to overlook opportunity or physical opportunity, because it can be a significant factor in it that will influence the success of a launch of a product or a service or take up of a service and so on. So you need to be aware of them even if you can't do anything about it. And that's the good thing about COM-B, is that you can have that conversation with a client that it doesn't matter if you can't do anything about it. It's still there. It's a reality, and COM-B can help you sort of map out that reality that a consumer or a customer is experiencing. And then motivation is anything that is basically things that drive your behavior. You could say that capability drives it, but it doesn't. It's just there. You still have to, you can know that a product exists, but you have to want to use it in order to buy it. And so motivation divides into two parts. One is the reflective motivation, which is stuff that you can talk about, that you're aware of, and automatic motivation is things that people find harder to talk about, sort of their how they feel about things, so emotions or habitual behavior and routines. They might be harder to talk about them, so it falls into those two. And then this is just to kind of show you that that's the top level of COM-B, which is helpful for organizing things. But underneath it, there's something called sits something called the theoretical domains framework, which adds a lot more granularity and detail. And I think there's this is a bit of a cut down list, but there are some 50 odd constructs, psychological constructs, that are derived from a lot of different theories to kind of fall under these, and that can help you map out in more detail. But it does require a fair bit of behavioral science knowledge, as I've experienced before trying to use it. It's until you get used to it. It's a bit like riding a bike or a car. It's like first you're looking at you're thinking about it consciously, but the more you use it, the easier it gets. And then the COM-B can also help you, like after you've mapped those out, the other step that you need to think about is prioritizing the barriers. And you can use these types of questions to think about, okay, how which ones are we're going to address and take forward. So how many people does it affect? How often? How does it affect them? Does it stop them or slow them down? And then from the other side, from your client side, is it easy? How easy is it for the client to design something to overcome it, or create something? How much does it cost? And it doesn't matter if all of those things are you've worked them out. If it doesn't fit with the brand, then you probably shouldn't. It's probably not worth it. And so thinking about using COM-B in research, there are many ways that you can adapt it to your purposes, and I'll show you a few that I've used as sort of extensions of it. But in theory, this is the way that it should work, is that you can use it at the beginning, so for diagnosis, to create hypotheses for what do you think might be going on in the situation, like what is the behavior, why is it happening, and really kind of hold yourself accountable, yourself and your team accountable for thinking about what those hypotheses. What comes off the top of your head might be in capability or motivation, but if you kind of challenge yourself to think about, is there something about the opportunity? Is there something about the physical environment, for example? If and kind of, even if you don't think it's significant, add it in and kind of, use your qualitative research, use your, usually probably in a depth interview, you'll have more time to go through them, but you can probably squeeze them into a discussion guide as well. You can then gauge which types of barriers are most relevant for the projects and the behavior in question. Sometimes you might be surprised. I have been surprised, and that's why I keep using something like this. And then the next stage is when you've done all that research and you understand which barriers are most salient, you can cross them with the intervention types. And there is a list of intervention types like education, persuasion, incentivizing, and some that are not always relevant for like coercion or restrictions. They might be if it's if it's something to do with a behavior that customers or consumers are doing that you don't want them to, or if it's a public sector project, then it might be. And then once these are not prescriptive, they are there to help you to kind of like narrow down your search of like, well, what could we do about this? Okay, let's start with this. And probably if you have a motivation, reflective motivation, then probably persuasion might be quite useful. Incentivization is probably quite useful to add, to add to the sort of drive to do something. And then the last stage is designing the interventions. You can use these to work with your client to generate ideas and understand what's feasible. So the delivery options are things like there's regulation, legislation, which are not usually relevant for us, but there's communication, there's guidelines. If some people don't know how to do something, then guidelines are quite useful. I tend to think that most projects at this last stage is too much detail, but it depends. It depends on the complexity of your project. That's not something I would show to a client. I would do that behind the scenes and just make it simpler for the end client, because it's not really their job to kind of have to wrap their head around all that. And then, as an output, you might create something like this for yourself, that you have your capability, then you map your most salient barriers, think about the solution types and interventions. And I think it's a good idea to actually always put them side by side so that you can check that your logic is solid throughout. What can the kind of pitfall that you might see that COM-B helps guard against is that you map your barriers and then you start ideation for co-creation, whatever, for solutions, and you get very excited about some of them, which is understandable. And then kind of casually in a process, or it's not checked against whether it actually addresses the barrier or the most salient barriers, and it kind of helps you keep on track. It can also happen that a stakeholder has a particular solution type that they like, and this can help you have that conversation like, are you sure that does it actually address what we wanted to address? And then there's you can use, by the way, slides will be available afterwards. So the these are the types of questions that you don't, if you are just brainstorming and thinking about it, these are the types of questions that you might ask yourself or ask within your team that, what might be influencing this behavior. At its very simplest, you can just use a list like this, like these types of questions to identify what might be going on. So this is kind of the simplest level, and you don't have to worry about the rest of the theory, and it'll still help you structure your thinking. And then just want to show you that there's the reason that you would do this kind of approach is that you can then look at the different types of things that will help as a solution. So for capability, quite often the solutions or the solutions, are things like communications or making the right thing easier to do with either product development, reminders, or providing services in store. And then for opportunity, if you have, if the some of or the most salient barriers for people for doing something are to do with the physical environment, for example, availability of a product or a service, or something is difficult to use, you can do all the marketing campaigns you want and it won't solve the problem. But instead you need to, which can be tricky if your client is, commissioning client is within a marketing team, and actually it's about a product, that can be quite a tricky thing to talk about. But realistically, you can do campaign, it won't really solve it. Social norms are very, 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 very tricky to change and take a long time. You can sometimes address that with communications, but it's a difficult one to overcome depending on the situation. And then motivation. Motivation is the thorniest and most challenging to address, because sometimes they are, if you have attitudes and beliefs or identity and things like that, or emotional barriers, they can be difficult and time consuming to change. But if you address the other two categories of factors, it can help influence motivation. So it's sort of perhaps counterintuitive, because a lot of what you might have seen about behavioral science talks about these like framing and so on, and emotional addressing influencing how people feel about something. You can, but actually sometimes the more tangible things are more powerful and they have a knock-on effect on motivation, so worth keeping that in mind. And there are a couple of questions that you can put into this. Just an example that to show you that you can generate questions like these to add them to your discussion guide or a questionnaire. Questionnaire is a little bit more difficult because you can't measure everything with an attitude or with a self-report statement. So that takes a little bit more thinking, but certainly in qual, it's relatively easy to kind of squeeze these in and get an idea. And then I've got some examples. I've seen quite a few questions, but I'll try to make sure that we've got enough time for everything. I'll show you a few examples of sort of extensions of the model that I've used. I can't share a couple of them because they're confidential, as most market researchers will know that there's a lot that is confidential, but at least you'll see a little bit. So I've used COM-B for a bunch of different things. Even these are just in the last couple of years. So most recently, electric vehicle driver behaviors or charging behaviors, actually, vaccine hesitancy in a couple of sub-Saharan African countries. Partner project. These are all partner projects, apart from the dog behavior. Even sort of business behaviors in food systems. That report might be out sometime soon, so I can probably share that somewhere. And that was an interesting one because somewhere in the middle of the project, we realized that the client actually what we were talking about, what they wanted to do was to address business behavior. So change the behavior of businesses as an entity. So we ended up extending the COM-B in a way that it hasn't officially been extended. I think it works nicely, and they were happy with it. It's a public body in the UK, and the client knew this before we did it. So that was an interesting one. And then things like allergy medication adherence. But before that, I've used it in a lighter way, like just the COM-B and not the theoretical domains framework, for example, in spirits, online shopping for spirits, or pest control and things like that. So it works for it. Really, the reason I'm such a I would say that I'm a real fangirl of COM-B is that it is robust yet it's flexible to kind of map out so many things, and I'm yet to see anything something that doesn't work for. It even works for observing or analyzing your dog's behavior. Some people might have noticed this, but when I'm not thinking about human behavior, I think about dog behavior for two dogs. And one day it just occurred to me that, hang on a minute, you could actually use this for dogs as well. And it's a work in progress, but it was a quite fun exercise. So one word of caution, in my experience, applying COM-B and behavior change wheel in the real world, the process is really simple on the pages of a book. And in reality, there will be some things that you haven't anticipated. And every single time there is something new that I hadn't anticipated. So it could be, well, actually, yeah, I'll mention those in these examples. They're sort of, I suppose these are examples of where I've stumbled and developed some sort of workaround for it, and hopefully maybe they'll inspire you as well. That it's worth using it, even if you have to kind of, it might take a little bit of time. So one thing that I found has been really helpful is that if you have for example, project with a commercial brand, and you do something about drivers and drivers and barriers, that kind of project where you have lots of them. I once upon a time used this kind of like roughly three stages of a consumer decision making process, at least in this case, and I've used in other categories too. It was soft drinks, to kind of stagger them or put them in different buckets. So you'll have barriers to like core needs. So are you thirsty? Do you or whatever, like that would be a core need. And that's, if you're not thirsty, you're definitely not even going to get onto that process of buying something. And so that'll be your, that'll be where you can put them, where you can put them in that bucket. And then the next bucket of barriers is potentially category perceptions and category barriers and drivers, and then user perceptions. And these will be the types of things that will you decide, okay, I am thirsty, but then you need to think about how you're going to satisfy that need for thirst. It could be water, it could be soft drinks, it could even be coffee, it could be whatever, and your perceptions about a particular category will influence that choice. And also user perceptions, like a healthy person will not drink sugary soft drinks and so on, or only unhealthy people that drink soft drinks and so on. So they fit into that. And then at the last stage, once you've kind of decided I'm going to solve my problem with this, this is my strategy for solving this complicated problem of thirst, then you get to put like, okay, I want a soft drink. Well, then then the barriers will be in that kind of like that brand and product perceptions, but also it could be a physical environment. You can put them in there as well, because you might have a logistics issue that a particular brand is not available there. So you can sort of combine different ways of sort of structuring it, because the actual COM-B model was designed for a certain types of behaviors and not necessarily choosing a product. So you may have to kind of use some creativity. Another example of adapting and extending it in practice is that this is from a vaccine hesitancy project. And I was asked to code 50 transcripts, in a particular country, and then using NVivo, which sort of quantifies it, we then had to work out a way to like, what do we do with this? And there's some specific, if you think back to the potholes that you might fall into, is that sometimes when people give their opinions or tell us why they do what they do, you might have two or three barriers.
Egy kombi, hogyan lehet használni egy ilyen viselkedés ellenőrzést.
Christian, could you mute yourself, please? I will. Oh no. Okay. All right. And then we had at least, we had some sort of way of getting the bigger picture of like, are there differences in the barriers, types of barriers by area or income or religion or and so on, or vaccination status in this case. And it was quite helpful to kind of see the woods from the trees. And but it gets very very complicated when you start to look at the theoretical domains framework. So there are lots of little little decisions along the way that you'll have to make every time, and there isn't necessarily a guidebook for those. At least I haven't found so far. It may exist somewhere in the depths of someone's computer. And then the last sort of example of the extension is this business behaviors that I mentioned. So we imagined how a business might be as a human being. So capability and opportunity, we kind of reimagine them. So capability could be they want to reduce their environmental impact of their home delivery scheme, but they don't have the staff to do it, so they don't have the capability to it, and so on. And I've got some examples here that might give you an idea of how we expanded it. And I think you could probably, there are probably lots of different ways of extending it and expanding it. I'm super interested in any and all extensions of this, because it wasn't designed for commercial use, yet it can be extremely helpful for us as well. But we will have to do some work to kind of build our knowledge base and work together on doing this. So yes, but this is like this is an example of how we've done that, and that's pretty much it. And I just wanted to sort of last thought is that it was actually I've been having these conversations with people. I put on a spur of the moment, Wim put a note on LinkedIn that anyone who wants to talk about COM-B book a slot, and then went about my evening, and the next day I had like 15 appointments booked, and it had gone semi-viral, as geeky post on LinkedIn can, and I've had some really interesting conversations. And I was saying to someone that my motivation for talking about this is that it is the spirit of COM-B is collaborative. It is not owned by anyone. It is there are people who have designed it and kind of created and done the initial work, but it is continually developed by different researchers. And I think the market research industry is very keen to keep all their models proprietary and so on. But in this case, it is difficult to own this, and we shouldn't, because it can help all of us. And I think it would be great if we can work together to develop our thinking on this. So that's kind of why I'm doing this, and that's pretty much it. So there are loads of questions. So Lucy, how should we do this?
So Jane, who's responsible for training, will read out the questions.
Okay.
Hi, Elina. Thank you very much for that. It was lots and lots of detail. And just to reassure people that the recording of this session will be available in a couple of days, I think. And also you provided the slides. So there was lots of detail from that for people to revisit. So thank you. So we've got some questions coming in. Some of them are pretty technical, and obviously with people who have some experience, and others are more my standard, I think, which is sort of as a novice. So I'm going to go in reverse. So one from Sarah Brew. In your experience, how well does COM-B apply to behaviours like choosing brand A over brand B? She's struggling to see that herself. So what's your view on that?
So that question might have come very early on. I think you can use it if you combine it with that kind of layers or layering those barriers. That was originally developed for that kind of question specifically. It was in what occasions do people pick this product over other products, and you could probably, in that case, if you were talking about a specific brand, you might not need to consider the core need. You can take that as a granted. That was about occasions. You can then in that case, you would probably it depends how granular your situation is, and if it's just about, we know that it's not a question of availability, we can rule all those things out, then you might not need it. If you're just talking about brand perceptions and things like that, then you don't need that necessarily. It honestly, it depends on how broadly your challenge is defined in the brief and and your proposal. That's a bit of a vague answer, but it can. But I think COM-B works best for slightly more complex behaviors. It's just more helpful there.
Okay. And one from MacBook coming in saying, if we wrongly identified behavior or intervention, can that be changed as we go through, as you go back, or simply fine tune it? So if you've kicked off with something and you think you identified something wrongly, can you then backtrack?
Of course. I mean, if you've already implemented something and then you didn't know that COM-B existed, for example, and now you're like, oh my God, we might have implemented the wrong thing. You just start the process over, and then you start from the barriers, and then you think about what intervention might work for that. That's not really a question of the model. It's your resources and what you can do with the project. But I think the big sort of shift with using something like COM-B is that in the past 10 years that I've been working in this area, most of this time we have started by talking about interventions and jumped straight into interventions, because that was kind of what Nudge and Thinking Fast and Slow and what they talked about. The focus was on all these cool interventions, and actually over time we realized, like, yes, maybe it would be better to look at the problem first. And I think for me, as coming from a market research background, it was always like the most natural place to start. And now a lot of people are coming to like, oh yes, maybe looking at barriers first would be a good idea. It's like, yes, of course it is. So I don't know. You can always start again. I mean, why not? But it's not to do with the model. It doesn't stop you moving any direction. Yeah. In fact, actually, the Business Behavior Project, we did do a sort of a retrospective as well. So there were already some policies in place, and we mapped those against the intervention functions, and then sort of worked backwards to what barriers they were, what assumptions was basically underneath them, and did it cover all of the potential influence on behavior. So you can work retrospectively from what you've already been doing to see, like, is there something else we could do? So it does work backwards as well for me. And actually, that is an official way. I found that afterwards from the UCL trainings. So it is their way as well. Okay.
Please feel free to step in if your question's being asked and you want to add something to it. So Divya, you raised a couple of points about some original papers in Implementation Science Journal suggesting that certain sources of behavior could be addressed by specific interventions and functions. For example, if ability and attention are a problem under capability, then I think one was suggested was education and training, which looks up my ears, of course. So, and her, that experience there it doesn't really fit, and she'd welcome your input.
Yeah. So there is a catch-all category of intervention functions called enablement, and that's pretty much anything that doesn't fit into those. Any other kind of intervention that doesn't fit into education, training, persuasion, whatever it is for that barrier type, and enablement fits in that would, the rest of it would fit in enablement, which often for commercial projects, a lot of things will fit into enablement. That's the simple answer. I mean, that is the answer, yeah. There is a TDF questionnaire. Yes, the questionnaire may work in some cases, but not in all cases. Certainly not always in a commercial project. So I have used. I think actually some of the questions are from that. I've just taken them put them on a slide such a long time ago that they are probably a version of that. I will actually check that. I should put references on them now after using them for many years. So yeah, there is, and I've adapted it.
Okay. Oh yes. One from Janice. One from Johannes about combining with journey mapping. Yep. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. Yes, it can be combined with journey mapping, and there are some. I meant to write about this, but I haven't yet, so I can promise that for next year. It's a whole. It could easily be a a whole 10-15 minutes of chat by itself. But essentially, I think there is actually an article by Amy Bucher and someone else whose name I've now forgotten to talk about that as well. In the context of UX, I will try to find it and post it somewhere, or send me a message and I will get that. So yes, absolutely it can. It's just not something that people have talked about a lot yet. And in general, I recommend Amy Bucher's book, Engaged. She talks about it in a UX context mostly and digital products, but it's still a great book to kind of more practical in commercial context use of COM-B.
Excellent. So Natalie, read business behaviours.
Yeah,
I wonder if business behaviours aren't behaviours of business decision makers rather than organisations. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, yes and no. Yes, of course they are, but for this particular project, it was more of it was a public body, and that's what they were interested in changing business behaviors. And we wanted to have a way of grouping different factors that might that mapped and kind of could be combined with the COM-B. So business decision makers, yes, but then it's not really an extension because it will be a totally different set of factors potentially for each individual person, like type of decision maker. So yes and no, really. That's yeah. And
okay.
Elif wants to know about continuity. Oh, sorry, go. Sorry,
no, I was just going to say, just trying to earn my crust here. So could you give an example of how COM-B helps create continuity across projects?
Yeah, so this is a purely hypothetical example. But imagine that in my past role, I might see, for example, I might see a client, or a client might come to us like, oh yes, we worked with agency X, and they use this model, and then basically it doesn't necessarily work in that context or the next project, or it doesn't cover everything because for reasons, and then it's difficult to have that conversation like, well, okay, but that doesn't apply here, and blah blah, or why not, without the discussion being difficult. So when you have something that we can agree on, that right, okay, we now agree on that these are the types of factors that influence people's behaviors. So if a client comes in and says, oh, we've used Mindspace, a previous agency used Mindspace, without making it sound negative, you can't say why Mindspace doesn't apply here, or why it doesn't work this and this and this. So it helps if you have some sort of, it was like, if imagine one agency does their debriefs in Spanish and the other one does them in French, and then whatever. It's like we all agree that it's like, let's go like an Esperanto of behavior change models, that we have some agreement, that some sort of common language, and then we can put our own spin on it, but at least we agree on some principles. So that's how it kind of in my view it helps. So there was a continuation. So when people have preference for other frameworks, yes, I am not a huge fan of BJ Fogg's model because it's very, 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 very thinly evidence-based. If you look on his website, it has a sort of hand-wavy list of these theories are part of it, and it's not specific at all. And actually, I think it only applies in very specific situations where what it was originally designed for, as in tech and digital design, and the extension to general every behavior, it's not enough in any by any measure. And to be honest, it shouldn't be trademarked because it's a it's a dog training technique as well. So it's like, it's the most basic thing from applied behavioral analysis, and it should not be trademarked. But I'm not a huge fan of that.
Okay.
So yeah, exactly. That is a very good point from Elif, that it's a helpful thing to kind of bridge different views. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? I think we've gone through everything.
Yeah, I have a rookie question.
Go.
Which is, a very rookie question, which would what would be your top tip for somebody who's completely new to this, but is interested, obviously, in the concept of stepping over the barrier and getting involved on a manageable and steady learning process. So what would be your tip for sort of embarking on something like this?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to really properly engage with it and kind of invest a little bit of time in understanding it, because just like anything else, is like you wouldn't say like, oh yes, I'm going to take on go on a road trip after taking watching someone else drive a car on TV. It's like it's any skill. It's actually using COM-B is a kind of a skill. It's not a body of knowledge. It's actually a skill set and kind of a way of thinking. So you do have to invest in developing that skill a little bit. How much depends how often you'll use it. For a lot of people, judging by the conversation on the mailing list, what is enough is to understand how the basically the first two levels work. So C, O, and M. And then the sort of the physical and psychological and so on. Understand what those mean, and then understand the process. Then work with someone who's invested a lot of time in it, because that will help you take it further and kind of save you from a lot of pain. But if you just want to structure some data, that's great. But if you want to, depends on how complex the behavior is, depends on how big the project is, and how how much detail you want to use. So it entirely depends on that. In the simplest case, just use the 6 buckets to structure your thinking and hypotheses. Brilliant. And it doesn't take all that much. But then if you want to go further, then it does probably take a little bit of time investment. I've put in a link for Amy Bucher's book, which is excellent. There is another book as well, but I'll get that. And there's for the experience, so journey mapping. This is one example of that. And there's another book that is really good.
Could you possibly put those on your charts, Elina, because that won't show on the recording. Also, we've got a question from Kays, which was asked earlier, but I haven't picked that one up.
Oh,
Kays, are you on? Would you like to ask your question? Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I can't turn my camera on. I don't think the permission allows it. Might be why everyone's is off. Yeah, so honestly, I'm not 100% sure what my question was, I'm afraid. I asked it like 3 days ago, and I think I'm just overwhelmed by your fantastic presentation. I'll just give a bit of feedback instead, because that was really useful. I loved how you presented all of the quite complex, I think, ideas in COM-B. I've had to do very similar things for presenting it in my own company, and which is a cycling charity, so certainly not other behavioural scientists. So I found that very useful. If you do manage to find my question in where I submitted it before, feel free to.
Yes, actually, I know what you mean. Yes, it's in the forums, which I was very cleverly I put that up and then I forgot about it. So, but yes, go on.
I'm sorry, I couldn't remember it. I think I've overwhelmed with your really, really fantastic way you presented this. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad it was helpful. It has I've honed it over the years trying to explain it to people.
Yeah.
The first or second or third iteration was not that good. It was still like I've come across many confused faces, like what is going on? What is this? Here we go. Shall I paste your question in here?
Sure, please do. And I totally.
Yeah, it was So it was what you asked for. Was the thing I come up with against. The thing I come up against time and time again is that the model is very extensive and takes a lot of time to go through, time that we don't really have. And does anyone do I have any advice on the most useful parts or exercise to go through when designing an intervention with a time limit? I think you can get relatively far if you're pushed for time. Stick to the first two layers really, and don't worry so much about the theoretical domains framework. It's kind of there to help, but it can be, when you first look at it, even when I first started using it, it was kind of it was kind of painful because I was trying to code these interviews and trying to hold up to 50 codes in my head. It was very, very slow until I got towards the end of it, and then it became more automatic. And it's the same thing with COM-B, that I can now quite easily sort of like flip them around in my head and kind of put them into buckets. But it takes, that's what I mean, that it's a skill rather than a particular knowledge base. Because when I use COM-B, I still don't, you understand where the barriers are. You still have to go looking for more detail. So let's say that I'm working on this allergy medication adherence project. We can use COM-B and behavior change wheel to kind of like give some hypothesis on how we might solve this. But then I have to still go and have a look around, like, well, more specifically, what would help me understand what's going on? And I, for example, found the health belief model and the protection. Oh, now I forgot what it was. Protection theory, motivation theory, I think it was, extension of that. And that gave me even more detail. It's kind of like zooming in, more and more and more. But at the very basic, it's very helpful to have that initial chunking. Chunking is probably familiar to a lot of people who've read about behavioral science and behavioral economics and interventions. You chunk information to make it more easily digestible and accessible. And that's kind of what COM-B does. It chunks a huge amount of information and data you might have into more manageable buckets. And then, then you can go and dive into it deeper. So I think, that's what I tend to do when I'm pushed for time, is to stick to the simpler levels and then only go into the detail if you need it. That's what I would say. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a really useful answer. I think, to be fair, I feel like that's quite a difficult question I asked, but that was a pretty good answer.
It is actually quite a fundamental question in some ways. I think if you are pushed for time and you stick to the simpler, the higher levels, not simpler, higher levels, then you can, if in doubt, if you're wondering, I'm seeing this factor, I wonder if is it capability or motivation, then you can kind of use the TDF as a theoretical domains framework as a reference, as an arbiter to decide which bucket to put it into, but then just leave it to aside for most part. That's what I would do. And that's what I would do.
Can I just double check though, by the top two levels, do you mean like the COM-B and then the extended version of the COM-B of like capability, that splits into physical and psychological, for example? Do you mean that sort of part of it?
So I sort of think the top level is a C, O, and M, and then the next level, the second level would, that's what I call the second level, is the physical, psychological capability, and so on. So that's like the second level. And then then you have the whole thing underneath it. Hopefully that was helpful. And then Divya, you had another question that I've used the TDF questionnaire and run a regression using the barriers as independent variables. And the most critical sources that had the max impact on intended behavior. I'm not sure if I understand. Divya, do you want to jump on and tell me more?
Yeah, sure, Elina. Firstly, thanks a lot. That's a fabulous presentation. Very useful because I've also been struggling to figure out how to take a project right through from start to end. So what I was saying is that in the TDF questionnaire, because it's very deliberate about the different sources of behavior, right? So it doesn't stop at OM, it doesn't stop at physical, physiological, etc. It goes right down to those 48 factors. So what was suggested to us once when we were using the COM-B model is to run a regression, use the intended behavior. So there is one statement over there which is intended behavior, that I intend to adopt this behavior the next time I am in this particular situation, right? So it follows a particular format, that statement, and you use that as a dependent variable, and use the bunch of others as independent variables. So you are able to understand through the regression model what's the most impactful source of behavior to change, or to create that intended behavior. That's what I meant. So that way you're sort of this one exactly.
Absolutely. And usually I would hope that there is maybe like this would come as a quant stage at the end after a qualitative stage, so you can cut down. You already have a good idea of which, like cut down version of the factors, and you know a little bit what's going on, because memory, attention, and decision making, that could be a bunch of different things, and it's unfeasible as a survey. The other thing is that what I've seen is that it can be difficult to measure everything with a statement. So that makes the regression a little bit more difficult, because you might have knowledge is not necessarily are you aware of brand X? That's not usually how we ask about things. It might be, in a list of questions, if it's about brands. It might be in a list of other brands, or it might be some other sort of slightly latent way of measuring it. So that does create a little bit of complication, but nothing that can't be overcome, really. But I would say that it probably takes more time to design the questionnaire than you're used to. You can't just, vomit a bunch of questions on paper and code it. So,
thanks for the
graphic image.
Right, I think we're going to have to wrap up now, because we've gone over our allotted time. I'm sure Elina would be happy to receive any more questions off air.
Yes.
So just a huge thank you from the ICG, Elina, for putting this together. Lots of information, lots of learning.
Hold on.
And yep.
Don't disappear yet. I'm just going to get the if anyone does want to talk about it more, then I will just get the link. And if you want to talk to me more, wait for one moment for the link. I will get that. But yeah, sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to say thank you very much, and thank you also to the manager for the epic effort she went into organising this and admitting everybody. So thank you for coming, everybody, and for our last webinar of the season, and we look forward to more in the new year. Thank you, Elina, very much indeed. Okay,
you're welcome.
Bye.
And have a good day, everyone. If you don't get the link, it'll be on my LinkedIn profile. So have a good day.
Okay.
All right, bye.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, Elina. Bye.